Day 2, part. Oops. Part 2. Because I was. Okay, look. My battery died. I'm on solar panels, and the batteries in my solar panel died because the sun decided to go away for a little while. But I was actually, live for a bit. What am I doing? Embed. See, I think for some reason everyone is hyper fixated on the sexual abuse part, which, and it's not good. It's not, the sexual abuse part was not good. The pedophilia is not good. But what allowed that to happen? So what I was doing is trying to get the intent. What was the intent to begin with? Canada asserted control of Aboriginal lands. Some locations Canada negotiated treaties with First Nations and others. The land was simply occupied or seized. The negotiated treaties, while seemingly honorable and legal, was often marked by fraud and coercion, and Canada was and remains slow to implement their provision and intent. Of not the intent of their white supremacist attitudes, but the intent that they agreed to. On occasion, Canada forced First Nations to relocate the reserves from agriculturally valuable and resource-rich land onto remote and economically marginal reserves. Okay. Canada replaced existing forms of Aboriginal government with relatively powerless band councils whose decisions it could override and whose leaders it could depose in the process. It disempowered Aboriginal women who had held significant influence and powerful roles in many First Nations. That's really important to keep reiterating. Cultural genocide is the destruction of those structures and practices that allow the group to continue as a group. States that engage in cultural genocide set out to destroy the political and social institutions of the targeted group. Land is seized, and populations are forcibly transferred, and their movement is restricted. Languages are banned, spiritual leaders are persecuted, spiritual practices are forbidden, and objects of spiritual value are confiscated and destroyed. And most significantly to the issue at hand, families are disrupted to prevent the transmission of cultural values and identity from one generation to the next. Canada denied the right to participate fully in Canadian political, economic, and social life to those Aboriginal children who refused to abandon their Aboriginal identity. And we kind of feel that today. Like, if I wanted to go off reserve, in some cases even on the reserve, and let's say I want to go get a job at a call center, I can't practice my Indigenous identity in a call center. And today we agreed and have fishing rights to make a moderate livelihood out of fishing, but we are compelled and strongly encouraged to utilize non-native fishing gear, non-native values, non-native techniques that eliminate our shared relationship with our food and the fish. We don't see them as our brothers and our kin anymore. We're still being assimilated. Because the idea that you're not participating in a consumer capitalist society means that you are in the way, that you are slowing down progress. But I argue that if we can do it in a sustainable, symbiotic manner, the way that is according to our traditions and our cultures, because it's not just a tradition and a culture, it's a system of extracting resources, for lack of a better term, that was done so by trial and error over thousands and thousands of years of oops, we made a mistake. Oops, we made a mistake. Let's try it this way. Oops, we made a mistake. This seems to be the most sustainable way to do it. But now that's like, we want to make money because our investors need exponential growth, and your method of sustainable extraction is hindering our legal fiduciary responsibility to our investors. Which is, and this is the superior way, which I don't agree with. I don't think it is a superior way. And Canada separated children from their parents, sending them to residential schools. This was done not to educate them, but primarily to break their link to their culture and identity. See, this right there, and to justify it, they said, to justify it, Sir John A. Macdonald said, when the school is on the reserves, the child lives with his parents, who are savages. He is surrounded by savages, and though he may learn to read and write, his habits and training and mode of thought are Indian, he is simply a savage who can read and write. He wanted to change their worldview and the way they do things altogether. Turn them into what we call an apple. Red on the outside, but white on the inside. It has been strongly pressed on myself as the head of the department that Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influences and protection, therefore allowing sexual abuse to happen. That's not being said, but that's exactly what happened. The school wasn't created to allow sexual abuse, but in genocide, in all genocide, for some reason, we attack children and there is rape. For some reason, and I don't understand what it is, probably because we reduce our enemies to subhuman. So that was the intent. It has been strongly pressed on myself as a head of the department. Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence, and in my words, protection. And the only way to do that would be to put them in central training industrial schools where they acquire the habits and modes and thought of the white man. So then, if you jump ahead on page, what did I say, 17? I can also say that our men are hurting too because of abuse scandals, and they said, well, if they could take a look at the rationale. We wanted to educate them. We wanted to eliminate, which was the true intent of the schooling system, was to change the way the native children were thinking and make them think like the white man. And that's what they're saying. That's the rationale behind it. So it's good. Of course, if you're superior, if you think you're superior, that's what you're going to say is good. And I'm telling you, it's not. It's eliminating a whole culture there. And reconciliation sessions, as well as I can also say that our men are hurting too because of the abuse scandal and the rift that this has created between First Nations and church representatives. Many of our men who are still working with First Nations have attended various truth and reconciliation sessions, as well as returning to spirit sessions, hoping to bring about healing for all concerned. The oblates, I don't know what that word means, oblates desire healing for the abuse and for all touched by the past breach of trust. It is our hope that together we can continue to build a better society. It's what I think a better society would be. If you can take an education system and it's willing to learn, which is ironic because I'm suggesting that an education system does not want to learn. But if education systems are willing to learn to adapt new methodology, like a way to tell a story and to retell a story is not simply just by reading. You can dance a story, like in a powwow, where you see a lot of these dancers and they're recreating a story through dance. So, which is beautiful, which is another method of expression. If you could add the two together, you could build a better society where education is expanded to include the entire body, mind, body, spirit, a holistic view. Later that same day, Ina Syker, who attended the Christie Residential School, painted a very different picture of the school from what the Brother Kavanaugh had described. I went to Christie's Residential School this morning. I heard a priest talking about his Christie Residential School. I want to tell him about my Christie Residential School. I went there for 10 months. 10 months that impacted my life for 50 years. I am just now on my healing journey. I need to do this. I need to speak out. I need for my mom and dad who went to residential school, for my aunts, my uncles, all that are beyond now, all the pain of our people, the hurt, the anger, the priest that talked about how loving that Christie Residential School was. It was not. That priest was most likely in his office not knowing what was going on down in the dorms or in the lunchroom. There were things that happened at Christie Residential School, and like I said, I'm just starting my healing journey. There are doors that I don't even want to open. I don't even want to open those doors because I don't know what it would do to me. These two seemingly irreconcilable truths are a stark reminder that there are no easy shortcuts to reconciliation. The fact that there were few direct exchanges at TRC events between survivors and former school staff indicates that for many, the time for reconciliation had not yet arrived. Indeed, for some, it may never arrive. At the Manitoba National event in 2010, survivor Evelyn Brockwood talked about why it is important to ensure that there is adequate time for healing to occur in the truth and reconciliation process. She said, when this came out at the beginning, I believe it was 1990, about residential schools, people coming out with their stories, and I thought the words they were using were truth, healing, and reconciliation, but somehow it seemed like we are going from truth-telling to reconciliation, to reconcile with our white brothers and sisters. My brothers and sisters have a lot of work to do in the middle. We should really lift up the word healing. Go slow. We are going too fast, too fast. We have many tears to shed before we even get to the word reconciliation. To determine the truth and to tell the full and complete story of residential schools in this country, the TRC needed to hear from survivors and their families, former staff, government, and church officials, and all those affected by residential schools. Canada's national history in the future must be based on the truth about what happened in the residential schools. 100 years from now, our children's children and their children must know and still remember this history, because they will inherit from us the responsibility of ensuring that it never happens again. What is reconciliation? During the course of the Commission's work, it has become clear that the concept of reconciliation means different things to different people, communities, institutions, and organizations. The TRC mandate describes a reconciliation as an ongoing individual and collective process, and will require commitment from all those affected, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis former Indian residential school students, their families, communities, religious entities, former school employees, government, and the people of Canada. Reconciliation may occur between any of the above groups. The Commission defines reconciliation as an ongoing process of establishing and maintaining respectful relationships. A critical part of this process involves repairing damaged trust by making apologies, providing individual and collective reparations, and following through with concrete actions that demonstrate real societal change. Interesting. Real societal change. So it's not just like a buzzword. Where is that? Societal change. All right, hang on. Canada's AI national. I should have saved this. Launched in 2017, the world's first national, the Pan-Canadian Artificial Intelligence Strategy. What I should do here is get rid of that. If I did this, screen capture. All right. And application capture. And come on. I think I should be able to choose another. I guess not. All right. Screw that. I guess that's just not going to happen. Wait, maybe I could. Maybe if I did this, screen capture. All right. And I go here. Aha. And then I look for this one. All right. Okay. All right. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Let's try this. Standards, talent, research, compute are partners. Let's try the Vector Institute. Reconciliation? No? Indigenous? No? Programs? Research? AI is remarkable. Is it? Indigenous. Because, like, what I saw was that one of these companies. Oh, wait. Black and Indigenous Research. Introduction to Machine Learning for Black and Indigenous. They had a reconciliation. It wasn't this one, though. It wasn't this company. It wasn't Vector. Sci-Far? Why is Sci-Far like the biggest one? Sci-Far. Programs. Oops. I really hate to use like chat for this. A journey of meaningful collaboration to increase indigenous part. So if you do a search for reconciliation, you get CIFAR launches a legacy space in partnership with the Gord Downey and Chaney. Governor General of Canada becomes visceral patron. Nothing about us without us. A journey of meaningful collaboration to increase indigenous participation in AI. So I'm wondering if they're utilizing reconciliation, the term reconciliation, to funnel money that's geared towards, I forget how they put it, that's geared towards meaningful change in society as a way to increase indigenous participation in AI. Advancements in artificial intelligence have the potential to change the world we live in, delivering social, economic, environmental benefits to Canada and around the world. No, it doesn't do any kind of environmental benefits to Canada. They also carry potential for harm if not created and implemented responsibly. As AI-based tools, products, and services become increasingly sophisticated and ubiquitous, it is more crucial than ever that the humans behind AI technologies actually represent the diverse communities they serve. Indigenous peoples have long been excluded and underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, education, and training, despite their contributions to STEM knowledge. Unfortunately, to date, the field of AI has been no exception. As a leading international research organization, here's if we want, with the calls to action from Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission in mind, we set out to understand the barriers faced by Indigenous students to STEM education and training. Is this residential schools just with a different name? It's still to undermine and get rid of the Indigenous culture. Through deep knowledge and meaningful collaboration with partners and in consultation with Indigenous and AI leaders, we developed a 3-part plan to increase Indigenous student participation in AI and launched a pilot program in summer 2022. Our plan included providing full funding of the direct and indirect costs for all Indigenous students accepted into any next-gen AI training program delivered by CIFAR and our partners across the country. Working with an Indigenous-led team. How do we find that out? Is it critical? How do we find out that AI companies are accessing truth and reconciliation funding that is supposed to be towards reconciling with the elimination of indigenous culture through education. Finding out if AI companies are accessing Truth and Recognition, specifically funds designated for Indigenous education and cultural preservation, requires monitoring federal procurement databases, searching funding recipient lists, and utilizing access to information. So I would hate it if reconciliation, money that's supposed to go towards truth and reconciliation, is actually utilized to eradicate indigenous worldview. You know, that would be, oh my God, that would be bad. I would really hate that. Interesting. Real society. Check the list of interested artificial intelligence AI suppliers maintained by Public Service Procurement Canada. How do you do that? Go to current recipients list. The Government of Canada maintains public records of funded projects. Search for digital capacity or education. All right. Documentary heritage organizations that have received funding, but that's for like the Heritage Communities Program. So like, okay, funding programs. Indigenous groups can apply for funds. Document heritage organizations apply for funding for projects to preserve and promote their holdings. What? Programs under Indigenous Services Canada or Crown Indigenous Relations. Search for non-Indigenous recipients. All right, I'm going to use AI for this. Oh my God. So click this link. Train passports, healing, additional, bringing the children home, advancing technology capacity for locating and commemorating residential school burial landscapes. I'm gonna have to like really dig into this, because I think that'd be very interesting to find out exactly who's receiving that funding. Because I don't know, I don't trust this. I don't trust this AI program where they can easily with Cypher's partnership, Actua integrated AI curriculum into their existing land-based for credit summer camp for high school students at the Thompson Island Cultural Camp in Akwesasne First Nation. Further, during the 22-23 school year, the CIFAR team had the opportunity to meet Indigenous student leaders in Actua's in STEM youth delegation to explore opportunities and challenges in the field of AI with them. Oh, I can hear my coffee water is ready. I gotta go make coffee. Who's a good dog? Are you a good dog? Hey, I'm cold. Ooh. It's cold. Is this thing even working? Cool. All right. What's that doing? What's going on? What's happening? I don't remember. Okay, I gotta change this thing. It's because I'm gonna go back to reading the actual Truth and Reconciliation. Pretty sure it's this one. Preview. Here it is. Okay. Establishing respectful relationships also requires the revitalization of Indigenous law and legal traditions. The revitalization of Indigenous law and legal traditions. What does that mean? It's important that all Canadians understand how traditional First Nations, Inuit, and Métis approaches to resolving conflict, repairing harm, and restoring relationships can inform the reconciliation process. Talking circles. One way. Traditional knowledge keepers and elders have long dealt with conflicts and harms using spiritual ceremonies and peacemaking practices, and by retelling oral stories that reveal how their ancestors restored harmony to families and communities. These traditions and practices are the foundation of Indigenous law. They contain wisdom and practical guidance for moving towards reconciliation across this land. As First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities access and revitalize their spirituality, cultures, language, laws, and governance systems, and as non-Aboriginal Canadians increasingly come to understand Indigenous history within Canada and to recognize the respect Indigenous approaches to establishing and maintaining respectful relationships, Canadians can work together to forge a new covenant of reconciliation. Despite the ravages of colonialism, every Indigenous nation across the country, each with its own distinctive culture and language, has kept its legal traditions and peacemaking practices alive in its communities. While elders and knowledge keepers across the land have told us that there is no specific word for reconciliation in their own languages, there are many words, stories, and songs, as well as sacred objects such as wampum belts, peace pipes, eagle down, cedar boughs, drums, and regalia that are used to establish relationships, repair conflicts, restore harmony, and make peace. The ceremonies and protocols of Indigenous law are still remembered and practiced in many Aboriginal communities. At the TRC Traditional Knowledge Keepers Forum in June 2014, TRC Survivor Committee member and elder Barney Williams told us that from sea to sea we hear words that allude to what is reconciliation, what does healing or forgiveness mean, and how there's parallels to all those words that the Creator gave to all nations. When I listen and reflect on the voices of the ancestors, your ancestors, I hear my ancestors alluding to the same thing with a different dialect. My understanding of reconciliation comes from a place in time when there was no English spoken. For my grandmother, who was born in the 1800s, I really feel privileged to have been chosen by my grandmother to be the keeper of our knowledge. What do we need to do? We need to go back to ceremony and embrace ceremony as a part of moving forward. We need to understand the laws of our people. At the same forum, Elder Stephen Augustine explained that the roles of silence and negotiations in Micmac law. He said silence is a concept and can be used as a consequence for a wrong action or to teach a lesson. Silence is employed according to proper procedures and ends at a particular time too. Elder Augustine suggested that there is both a place for talking about reconciliation and a need for quiet reflection. Reconciliation cannot occur without listening, contemplation, meditation, and deeper internal deliberation. Silence in the face of residential school harms is an appropriate response for many indigenous peoples. We must enlarge the space for respectful silence in journeying towards reconciliation, particularly for survivors who regard this as a key to healing. There is a place for discussion and negotiations for those who want to move beyond silence. Dialogue and mutual adjustment are significant components of Micmac law. Elder Augustine suggested that other dimensions of human experience, our relationships with the earth and all living beings, are also relevant in working towards reconciliation. This profound insight is an indigenous law which could be applied more generally. Elder Reg Crowshoe told the Commission that indigenous peoples' worldviews, oral history traditions, and practices have much to teach us about how to establish respectful relationships among peoples and with the land and all living things. Learning how to live together in a good way happens through sharing stories and practicing reconciliation in our everyday lives. When we talk about the concept of reconciliation, I think about some of the stories that I have heard in our culture, and stories are important. These stories are so important as theories, but at the same time, stories are important to oral cultures. So when we talk about stories, we talk about defining our environment and how we look at authorities that come from the land, and how that land, when we talk about a relationship with the land, and how we look at forgiveness and reconciliation is so important when we look at it historically. We have stories in our culture about our superheroes, how we treat each other, stories about how animals and plants give us authorities and privileges to use plants as healing. But we also have stories about practices, how we practice reconciliation, how would we practice getting together to talk about reconciliation in an oral perspective, and how those practices are so important. As Elder Crowshoe explained further, reconciliation requires talking about how our conversations must be broader than Canada's conventional approaches. Reconciliation between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians, from an Aboriginal perspective, also requires reconciliation within the natural world, with the natural world. If human beings resolve problems between themselves but continue to destroy the natural world, then reconciliation remains incomplete. Yeah, you get that, AI? Like, what the hell, man? AI data centers are going to destroy the world, the natural world. Yet, you're using terms like reconciliation in your website. Come on! This is a perspective that we as commissioners have repeatedly heard, that reconciliation will never occur unless we are also reconciled with the earth. Mi'kmaq and other indigenous laws stress that humans must journey through life in conversation with negotiation with all creation. Reciprocity and mutual respect help sustain our survival. It is this kind of healing and survival that is needed in moving forward from the residential school experience. Over the course of its work, the Commission created space for exploring the meaning and concepts of reconciliation. In public sharing circles at national events and community hearings, we bore witness to powerful moments of truth sharing and humbling acts of reconciliation. Many survivors have never been able to tell their own families the whole truth of what had happened to them in the schools. At hearings in Regina, Saskatchewan, Elder Kirby Littletent said, "I never told. I just told my children and my grandchildren I went to boarding school. That's all. I never shared my experiences." Many spoke to honor the memory of relatives who had passed on. Simone, an Inuk survivor from Chesterfield Inlet, none of it, said, "I'm here for my parents. Did you miss me when I went away? Did you cry for me? And I'm here for my brother, who was a victim, and my niece at the age of 5, who has suffered a head injury and never came home, oh boys. And her parents never had closure, yeah. To this day, they have not found the grave in Winnipeg, and I'm here for them first. And that's why I'm making a public statement. I don't understand why the children are always attacked in genocidal acts. It's always the children. What? Oh. It's really snowing outside. Where did that come from? It's like snowing really hard. Others talked about the importance of reconciling with family members and cautioned that this process is just beginning. Patrick Etherington, a survivor from St. Anne's Residential School in Fort Albany, Ontario, walked with his son and others from Cochrane, Ontario, to the national event in Winnipeg. He said that the walk helped him to reconnect with his son and that he just wanted to be here just because I feel this process that we are starting, we got a long ways to go. We saw children and grandchildren of survivors who, in searching for their own identity and place in the world, found compassion and gained new respect for their relatives who went to the schools. Once they heard about and began to understand their experiences at the Northern National Event in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, Maxim Lacorne said, As a young lady, I talk with people my age because I have a good understanding. I talk to people who are residential school survivors because I like to hear their stories, you know. It gives me more understanding of my parents. It is an honor to be here, to sit here among you guys, survivors. Wow, you guys are strong people. You guys survived everything, and we're still going to be here. They tried to take us away. They tried to take our language away. You guys are still here. We're still here. I'm still here. We heard about children whose small acts of everyday resistance in the face of rampant abuse, neglect, and bullying in the schools were quite simply heroic. At the TRC British Columbia National Event, Elder Barney Williams said that many of us, through our pain and suffering, managed to hold our heads up. We were brave children. We saw old bonds of childhood friendship renewed as people gathered and found each other at TRC-sponsored events. Together, they remembered the horrors that had endured, even as they recalled with pride long-forgotten accomplishments in various school sports teams, music, and art activities. We heard from resilient, courageous survivors who, despite their traumatic childhood experiences, went on to become influential leaders in their communities in all walks of Canadian life, including politics, government, law, education, medicine, and corporate world, and the arts. We heard from officials representing the federal government that administered the schools. In a sharing circle in the Manitoba National Event, an Honorable Chuck Strahl, the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development Canada, said, Governments like to write policy. and they like to write legislation, and they like to codify things and so on. And Aboriginal people want to talk about restoration, reconciliation, forgiveness, about healing, about truth. And those things are all things of the heart and of relationship, and not of government policy. Governments do a bad job of that. Church representative spoke about their struggles to right the relationship with Aboriginal peoples in Inuvik. Anglican Archbishop Fred Hiltz told us that, as a church, we are renewing our commitment to work with the Assembly of First Nations in addressing long-standing Indigenous justice issues. As a church, we are requiring anyone who serves the church at a national level to go through anti-racism training. We have a lot to do in our church to make sure that racism is eliminated. Do they mean racism or superiority? Superiority complex. Piety. Get rid of piety. Be so humble that you can't even... Oh, we couldn't possibly teach you about spirituality. We're far too humble. We know nothing of spirituality. Educators told us about their growing awareness of the inadequate role that post-secondary institutions played in training the teachers who taught in the schools. They have pledged to change educational practices and curriculum to be more inclusive of Aboriginal knowledge and history. Yeah, still waiting on that. Artists share their ideas and feelings about truth and reconciliation through songs, paintings, dance, film, and other media. Corporations provided Corporations provided resources to bring survivors to events, and in some cases, some of their own staff and managers. What time is it? It's like almost 2. Almost 2. Corporations provided resources to bring survivors to events, and in some cases, some of their own staff and managers. For non-Aboriginal Canadians who came to bear witness to survivors' life stories, the experience was powerful. One woman said simply, "By listening to your story, my story can change. By listening to your story, I can change." Reconciliation as relationship. In its 2012 interim report, the TRC Reconciliation as relationship. In its 2012 interim report, the TRC recommended the federal and provincial and territorial governments and all parties to the settlement agreement undertake to meet and explore the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework for reconciliation in Canada. We remain convinced that the United Nations Declaration provides the necessary principles, norms, and standards for reconciliation to flourish in the 21st century Canada. A reconciliation framework is one in which Canada's political and legal systems, educational and religious institutes, and corporate sector and civic society functions in ways that are consistent with the principles set out in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Canada has endorsed. Together, Canadians must do more than just talk about reconciliation. We must learn how to practice reconciliation in our everyday lives, within ourselves and our families, in our communities, governments, places of worship, schools, and workplaces. To do so constructively, Canadians must remain committed to the ongoing work of establishing and maintaining respectful relations. For many survivors and the families of this commitment, for many survivors and their families, this commitment is foremost about healing themselves, their communities, and nations in ways that revitalize individuals as well as Indigenous cultures, languages, and spirituality, laws, and governance systems. For governments, building a respectful relationship involves dismantling a centuries-old political and bureaucratic culture in which, all too often, policies and programs are still based on failed notions of assimilation. Yeah, no kidding. Come on. I want to highlight that. How come it's not highlighting? For churches, demonstrating long-term commitment requires atoning for actions within the residential schools, respecting Indigenous spirituality, and supporting Indigenous people's struggles for justice and equity. Schools must teach history in ways that foster mutual respect, empathy, and engagement. All Canadian children and youth deserve to know Canada's honest history, including what happened in the residential schools, and to appreciate the rich history and knowledge of Indigenous nations who continue to make such a strong contribution to Canada, including our very name and collective identity as a country. For Canadians from all walks of life, reconciliation offers a new way of living together. I don't know if a cultural genocide had only one point of attack. Like, was it just the education system, or because I thought there were other things? Like, the other thing they said at the beginning of this whole thing is that they replaced traditional Indigenous governance systems with chiefs and councils that could do very little, and that they could be deposed of at any time. But this report seems to narrow in on the schools, or even what the church did, and seems to have forgotten the government itself. Although they do say that the bureaucratic culture in which, all too often, policies and programs are still based on failed notions of assimilation. But we're not hearing stories of that. We only hear stories of the church, of the school system, I mean. So where are the stories of the failed notions of assimilation? Shouldn't we learn from that as well? Right? Right? Tell me I'm right. Come on, I like hearing I'm right. Just go on, say it. Say it! For churches, demonstrating long-term commitment requires atoning for actions. Schools must teach history, including what happened to residential school, and appreciate rich history and knowledge from Indigenous nations who continue to make such a strong contribution to Canada, including our very name and collective identity as a country. For Canadians from all walks of life, reconciliation offers a new way of living together. Okay, that's the end of the introduction. And we're on page 27 of 382. It took 2 days to read the introduction. What the hell is more to say? What did I say? We're up to page 27? The truth and okay, this is commission activities. So, what? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was established in 2008 under the terms of an Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. That's why it was solely focused on the residential school. Revealed to Canadians the complex truth about the history and ongoing legacy of the church-run residential schools in a manner that fully documents the individual and collective harms perpetrated against Aboriginal peoples, and honors the resilience and courage of former students, their families, and communities, and guide and inspire the process of truth and healing, leading toward reconciliation with Aboriginal families and between Aboriginal peoples and non-Aboriginal communities, churches, governments, and Canadians generally. The process was to work to renew relationships on a basis of inclusion, mutual understanding, and respect. More specifically, the Commission was required to hold 7 national events to gather documents and statements about residential schools and their legacy, to fund truth and reconciliation events at the community level, to recommend commemoration initiatives to the federal government for funding, and to set up research center that will permanently house the Commission's records and documents, which the parties were obligated to provide to the Commission, thereby establishing a living legacy of the Commission's work. And to issue a report with recommendations. 3 commissioners were appointed in 2008, the Honorable Justice Harry Laforme as chair, and Jane Bruin Morley and Claudette Dumont Smith. They resigned shortly after being appointed, and new commissioners were appointed. What the hell happened there? The current commissioners, and Honorable Justice Murray Sinclair as chair, and Chief Wilton Littlechild and Dr. Marie Wilson, were appointed to replace them in 2009 by the parties to the settlement agreement. An Indian Residential School Survivor Committee provided advice and support to the Commission. Its members included John Banksland, Inuvialuit from the Northwest Territories, John Morisseau, Métis from the Grand Rapids, Manitoba, Eugene Arcan Cree from Muskeg Lake First Nation, Saskatchewan, Madeleine Basile, a member of the Atikameku Nation from Wemotasi, Quebec, Lodi Mae Johnson, Mi'kmaq from Eskazoni, Nova Scotia, Rebecca Uki Williams, Inuk from Nunavut, Doris Young, Cree from the Passamaquoddy, and Pass from the Pass, Manitoba, Barney Williams Jr., Ta'i Simchilt, Nu Cha Nult from Tlaokia First Nation on Mares Island, British Columbia, Gordon Williams from the Peguis First Nation in Manitoba, now residing in Ontario, and Kokduka Terry Brown from the Tahltan Nation in British Columbia. Raymond Arcan, a former chief of the Alexander First Nation near Edmonton, Alberta, served on the Survivors Committee until his death in November 2009. The Commission received continuing support throughout its mandate from the parties to the settlement agreement. Regular all-parties meetings were held to discuss opportunities and challenges that arose in fulfilling the Commission's goals. The Commission worked with the parties to address topics such as document collection, communications, public education, and survival travel support for completion of the Commission's work. Representatives of the parties also took part in working groups at the national and local levels to support the Commission in planning and implementing its national and regional events. The Commission established its head office in Winnipeg, Manitoba, retained a small Ottawa office, and opened satellite offices in Vancouver, British Columbia, Hoboema, Alberta, and Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. In recognition of the unique cultures of the Inuit and their experiences and the impacts of residential schools on them, the Commission also established an Inuit subcommission. 7 regional liaison officers were hired with advice from the IRSSC and were assigned responsibility to work with the following regions: Quebec, Atlantic Canada, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia, and Yukon in the Northwest Territories. Meeting from coast to coast. During the 6 years of its operation, the Commission held events in all parts of the country. The largest and most visible of these were the national events held in Winnipeg, Inuvik, Halifax, Saskatoon, Montreal, Vancouver, and Edmonton between June 2010 and March 2014. The Commission estimates that there were as many as 155,000 visits to the 7 national events. Over 9,000 residential school survivors registered to attend them, while many others attended but did not register. To augment its statement gathering activities and to help build public interest and participation in its national events, the TRC organized regional events in Vancouver, Victoria, and Whitehorse. It also held 238 days of local hearings in 77 communities across the country. The Commission also sponsored town halls on reconciliation in its Victoria regional event in April 2012, and at subsequent national events as a means to draw a greater number of visitors into conversation with the TRC about healing and reconciliation. Members of the general public were invited to come forward at the town halls to share information about what they are already doing to support reconciliation, to describe their ideas about what more needs to be done. Until the Commission was established, the voices of those who were most directly affected by the residential school experience, particularly the former students, had largely been missing from the historical record. The Commission made a commitment to offer everyone involved with the residential school system the opportunity to speak about their experience. The Commission received over 6,750 statements from survivors of residential schools, members of their families, and other individuals who wished to share their knowledge of the residential school system and its legacy. Statements were gathered at public sharing panels and sharing circles at national, regional, and community events and at Commission hearings. They were also collected through private conversations with statement gatherers. The Commission also gathered statements in correctional institutions in Kenora, Ontario, and Yellowknife, Northwest. Cool, they got a big walrus in the wall back there. Northwest Territories, recognizing the high rates of incarceration of Aboriginal peoples and how the experience of residential schools has contributed to the kinds of personal struggles that may lead to incarceration. Health support workers, cultural support workers, or professional therapists were present everywhere the Commission gathered statements to provide support and counseling as needed. In an effort to understand all aspects of the residential school experience, the Commission also made a concerted effort to gather statements from former staff of residential schools, with the assistance of the church parties to the settlement agreement. The Commission conducted 96 separate interviews with former staff and the children of former staff. In addition, the Commission received statements from former staff and their family members at its national and regional events and community hearings. The statements gathered will form part of a permanent collection of documents relating to residential schools. Under the terms of the settlement agreement, the federal government and the churches were obliged to turn over relevant documents in their possession to the Commission. The Commission has had to overcome some significant challenges to completing this task and has had to seek court direction to resolve disputes with the parties about the handing over of documents. Once the Commission's documents collections process began, it became increasingly apparent that Canada would not produce numerous documents that appeared to be relevant to the Commission's work. Of course! That's interesting. First, the federal government declined to produce all relevant documents held in its National Archives, Library and Archives Canada. Library and Archives Canada took a position that it was not required to organize and produce to the Commission up to 5 million documents in its possession that were directly... How many documents is in the Epstein case? Isn't it about the same thing? So how can... There must be more than 5 million. Right? I mean, we're talking about... Epstein was one pedophile. We're talking about a whole government and a whole church, many churches. There must be more than 5 million. There has to be. I am going to be distracted for a moment. Because I gotta be distracted every once in a while. Right? Hey, why are my feet cold? What's going on? What's happening? How do I do this again? I want to share something. Oh yeah, I think I gotta go. I gotta go to Facebook. I have to go here. Change that. Share. Copy link. Boink. Well, whoops. 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 Don't look at my passwords. Where? Here it is. Still reading the report. Part 2. There we go. Okay. Now I need to go back here. $5 million documents in its possession that were directly relevant to the residential schools. Library and Archives Canada maintained that the settlement agreement required it to provide the Commission only with access to its archives. A lengthy process which included the filing of written arguments, affidavit evidence, and court-ordered mediation between Canada and the Commission culminated in a hearing before the Honourable Justice Stephen Gouge of the Ontario Court of Appeals, sitting as Ontario Superior Court Justice, on December 20th and 21st in 2012. By judgment dated January 30th, 2013, Justice Gouge ruled in favor of the Commission's position that the terms of the settlement agreement provided that all relevant documents held by the Government of Canada, wherever they may be held, must be produced to the Commission. Following the ruling, that the Government of Canada began producing documents from Library and Archives Canada to the Commission. Less than a year later, the Commission once again was required to go to court for judicial guidance respecting Canada's document production obligations. At issue were records in the possession of the Government of Canada from the investigation of the Ontario Provincial Police into the abuse of Fort Albany, Ontario Residential School in Ontario, also known as St. Anne's School. The Commission had attempted to obtain the OPP documents from both the OPP and the federal